only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Czechoslovakia probably had the worst luck of the war, since they were threatened to be invaded by the Nazi regime. As a result, Britain and France handed Czechoslovakia over to Nazi Germany. This, however, would just only convince Hitler that the Allies were going to do nothing to stop his crazy and conqueror's ways. The man here in this photo is Emil Hacha, who was the Czech president at the time. He was considered a weak leader and also handed over his country as the result of the Munich Agreement. He would later help the Nazis collaborate against stopping resistances. Britain's Prime Minister Nambro Chamberlain would later go home to praise about how he avoided another war, but realistically all he did was encourage World War II to start. Czechoslovakia would be one of the few nations to just be turned over to an Axis power, if the only one, during the war. As you can see in this video, you can see that the Germans paraded around their newly captured territory as they pretty much took it without a shot. It's because of this, it was quite a morale boost to the German people who were sick of losing since they lost World War I. Czechoslovakia's borders would return to the same place they were when the war started. However, they would later be influenced by the Soviet Union's communist ideals and signed with the Warsaw Pact. If you want to go tour the place, good luck with that, because Czechoslovakia is no longer around since they collapsed in the 1990s. Now they are known as the Czech Republic. Poland was invaded by both Germany and the Soviet Union as a result of a treaty to split the country between themselves. Poland would also be used as an area to test out the Blitzkrieg, which was a strategy of using mass air attacks, which would be followed by tanks and soldiers invading the area. Nordisler Anders and the other Polish politicians would flee to the United Kingdom in refuge for exile from after their country was taken over. Poland was used as a staging ground for the final solution, which is also known as the Holocaust, which would round up Jews and other undesirable groups, which ended up killing about 6 million Poles between 1939 to 1945. To talk about the experiences, I'll let Lydia Tischler's interview from Channel 4 play.
Auschwitz was hell. Auschwitz really was hell. We were on the last but one transport to Auschwitz, the last transport where all the prominents in Terezin who went straight into the gas chamber. There were about 50 of us in a kettle truck with a bucket, that was it. We arrived in the middle of the night, and in Auschwitz you could smell the fear. You really could smell it. And we had to go through selection. We didn't know it was selection, but that's what it was. Mengele, whom you may have heard, was standing there, and he looked at you and then sent you to the left or to the right. The left was the side for living and the right was the side for gas. I knew that our mother, because she didn't come to the left, she went to the right. I headed into another room where we were sat on benches like in a theater, stacked, and by then people who had been there for some time told us, you know, you will go to the gas chambers. And so we sat there, and I must say I sat there and didn't know whether it would be water or gas.
Poland's borders would be reshaped both during and after the war, which in the end would result in Poland losing some territory. After taking power and solving a massive debt crisis, Adolf Hitler decided to rebuild the military and march into the Rhinelands, which was prohibited by the Treaty of Versailles. Because the Allies did not intervene, it gave Hitler the idea that the Allies were not going to... Because the Germans were not stopped from marching into the Rhinelands, Hitler decided to continue his massive invasions and campaigns and threatened to invade Czechoslovakia, which the Allies turned over to him. Hitler decided to invade Poland with the Soviet Union, and the invasion this time prompted Great Britain and France to enter the war, which Germany fought and pushed them both back. You've seen on this graph, the Nazi advance was quite swift throughout Europe, as the Allies tried to hold the continent. After failing to beat Great Britain at the Battle of Britain, Hitler decided to move east and attack the Soviet Union. After fighting the Soviet Union, pushing them back, in 1942 the Soviet Union scored their first victory, slowing the Germans at the Battle of Stalingrad. This would be the end of the Third Reich's winning streak. The Allies would later move into North Africa and defeat the Germans on the continent and start the invasion of Sicily and Italy. The United States and United Kingdom would open up a second front by the D-Day landings in 1944. This would start to spell the end for the Third Reich as the Soviet Union, United States, and Great Britain closed on Germany. Hitler would try to launch a knockout blow against the United States and Great Britain by launching what is known as the Battle of the Bulge. Although this backfired horribly and Hitler lost any chance of actually winning the war, because Patton's Third Army was able to crush the Nazis moving in on them during the winter of 1944 and the beginning of 1945. At the end of the war, the Soviet Union would march into Berlin and capture the city. With the war seeming impossible to win, Hitler would kill himself in his bunker along with his mistress. With the war over, Germany was split between the United States, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, and France. It would eventually become a point of contention during the Cold War. While it was pretty hard to find a map of Japan pre-World War II, here's a map of what it looked like during the war. As you can see, Japanese soldiers invaded China and destroyed a lot of Chinese villages. While Japan and China had been fighting conflicts prior to the war, this was the mass invasion of the mainland. The United States responded by placing an oil embargo on Japan and also threatened to block Japan from any more conqueror's goals. Japan decided that they had to do something to prevent the U.S. from having an advantage if they were to get into the war.
On December 7, 1941, Japan, like its infamous Axis partners, struck first and declared war afterwards.
Japan decided to strike the United States naval fleet, which were stationed at Honolulu, Hawaii. The bombing sank a lot of U.S. ships and also destroyed a ton of planes at the base. The problem, however, was that the United States aircraft carrier fleets were all on deployment during the attack, and as such, Japan wasn't able to knock out the entire U.S. fleet, which gave the United States an advantage to fighting the war. In the following year of 1942, the United States would launch an invasion of Guadalcanal and also fight many sea battles such as the Battle of Coral Sea. However, our victories would first come at the Battle of Midway, which was a devastating blow to the Japanese Navy, which ended up sinking 4 of their carriers compared to us losing the USS Yorktown. To Japan, this was a critical blow. Not only did they lose a ton of pilots, they also lost 4 aircraft carriers. Quote Enterprise Battle 360 from History Channel.
The Japanese Navy has faced tremendous loss. They sent their finest fighters and failed.
Hundreds of them were their very best pilots, and they never recovered.
The Japanese don't possess the capability of replacing those assets, whereas the sleeping giant sitting back in North America was just getting started.
The war would go on with many battles, and eventually the United States would retake and push back the Japanese military. After dropping 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan finally surrendered to the United States, which in the end would cause them to lose some of their territories, such as the Korean Peninsula. The Japanese man you see here in this photo is Hiro Onada. He was the last soldier to ever fight World War II that we know about. He officially surrendered in 1974 after refusing to believe that the war had ended. He figured it was an Allied trick and decided to stay fighting in the Philippines where he was stationed. He only came out of the war when a journalist tracked down his commanding officer and had him contact Onada, telling him that Japan had lost the war and it was time to come home. He came home to Japan getting a hero's welcome, although it was quite hard for him to readapt. He passed away in January of 2014. Whatever you think about the war or his country, you have to admit he was loyal until the end.